I've got the newest member of our expert F1 team, Jon Noble, here with me to tackle what we think are going to be the most awkward questions facing F1's teams heading into 2025. So John, let's dive straight in. Big topic at Ferrari. What happens if Charles Leclerc beats Lewis Hamilton?
Fascinating one. I think it depends on what the beating is, basically. I think no one's expecting Lewis to come in and sweep the floor and march on World Championship, easy peasy. Leclerc's, sensational season last year, led that team. Potentially, maybe if things had been different with that Spain upgrade, not having some of those wobbles later on, world title potentially could have been there if things had gone perfectly. He's going to be super strong this year. I think it's the extent to which those two are matching up. Question is, has Lewis still got it in him? Has he kind of shaken off the self-doubt that came into him last year, the struggles in qualifying against George, showed he was good in race pace. And I think key to it will be, does he suit that Ferrari or not? If he suits it, I think he'll be strong and they'll get that belief and that injection he needs. If he doesn't, then I think the interesting thing to be whether he can address this spiral or he hits a big trouble.
I think the big question there is how he adapts to the car, isn't it? Because there does seem to be this particular challenge he has with this generation of ground effect F1. He's not the only driver to struggle with them, but our colleague Mark Hughes has written quite eloquently about the age thing and Hamilton being in decline being a bit of a red herring, if you like, because it's more about how Mercedes has developed its own car, this flexible front wing, how they use that to back the car out of ground effect and balance the car properly between high and low speed. It means the platform's very flat and stiff and low, and there's not much pitch, which is when the front of the car dives forward under braking. Of course, Hamilton's great strength throughout his whole F1 career has been his ability to brake really late, not lock up the tyres and get the car turned in as quickly as possible. And he hasn't been able to do that with this generation of cars. So the hope from him and his fans will be that the Ferrari is a different story in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's an issue with these ground effect cars and this theory popping around the end of last year that drivers who've been strong on the brakes and good on corner entry, Daniel Ricciardo, Kevin Magnussen, Sergio Perez to a lesser great extent, and Lewis Hamilton have all struggled. They've not been sensational with this rules era. The 18-inch tyres don't give as much kind of movement, and I think that there's been a similar characteristic from all of them that quick in races, race pace doesn't seem to be too bad, but in qualifying when you need that grip and confidence, the fronts lock, and you don't have that confidence and the time kind of ekes away. And added on top of that is this problem with the Mercedes, a lot of low speed understeer, which meant really difficult to get the car turned in. So he and George Russell had to rotate an awful lot on the rear. Lewis couldn't cope as much with those kind of the loose rear ends and the snaps of oversteer, and that's where the lap time trickled away. If this Ferrari gives him the confidence on the front, can get closer to Charles in qualifying and he's up there, I think then it'll be an absolutely fascinating dynamic between the pair of them.
I mean, the inherent characteristics of the Ferrari, it's very good at low speed and quite benign in those types of corners, should help Hamilton. But obviously at the same time, he's got the challenge of going up against someone who's perhaps the fastest driver over a single lap in F1 right now in Charles Leclerc, who also has the advantage of incumbency in the team. He knows Ferrari inside out. So it's not going to be an easy challenge for Hamilton, even if he's back to his best.
No, but I think Lewis is fired up by the challenge. I think he'll feel invigorated by an environment around him. He's going somewhere where it is fresh. He can, start things again. He feels loved. He feels wanted. He'll have the fans behind him. He knows Charles isn't going to be easy. Charles is sensational, especially in qualifying. But I think Lewis has that experience, has that knowledge, has the race pace, has the canniness to deliver the results on the Sunday, even if on Saturdays he's not as close as perhaps he'd like to be.
Moving on to Aston Martin. Can Aston Martin prove itself worthy of someone like Adrian Newey?
I think it needs kind of Adrian Newey's input to kind of turn things around. I think the worthiness is a big problem. I think Adrian knows what he's coming into. I think that team kind of lost its way a little bit, but has started addressing things. Andy Cowell's come in, looked at things, realised we aren't going in the right direction. I think there was a kind of old school obsession, which a lot of teams have fell into. Alpine had this same thing, chasing peak downforce, thinking that, the old school thing, throw the downforce on and we'll deliver lap time. Doesn't work with this generation of cars. It's about usable platform, a platform that gives drivers confidence. Something McLaren have unleashed. It's something Mercedes started to understand. Red Bull found last year to its cost. If you have a platform that doesn't suit the drivers, things go astray. So Aston have having this reshuffle. Dan Fallows has been moved out. Enrique Cardet is coming in at some point. But I think Newey will come in and the focus for him will be 26. But I'm absolutely sure on March the 2nd, when Newey sits down at his desk, he'll be giving a long kind of lecture to everyone about what they need to do for the 25 car and to turn things around that season.
Well, we know that Newey is a particularly pragmatic F1 genius in terms of design, engineering, aerodynamics. And obviously it won't escape anyone's attention that he's left Red Bull and then Red Bull's hit a bit of a slide. So Aston will obviously be hoping that 2026 aside, some of the Newey kind of gold dust can rub off on them straight away. What can Adrian do when he gets behind the desk to kind of get Aston Martin up the grid straight away? Because they can't write off 25, can they?
No, they can't afford at all to write off 25. But I think the key thing that Aston Martin is potentially lacking is this understanding of what makes a competitive current ground effect car. I think these are really complicated, difficult beasts in terms of understanding, where do you target your downforce? You've got varying ride heights that you've got to address. How do you kind of balance the platform with the suspension? How do you integrate flexi wings into all of that? And I think this is what they've been lacking so far. Cardio will bring that from Ferrari. Newey will definitely have this from Red Bull, because I think he understood from day one what was needed for this ground effect concept. You go back to the start of 22, I remember Pierre Vache, I said to him, what did Newey particularly help with this? Because obviously Newey studied ground effect cars and suspension systems at university. So it's all about the rock solid floor. So at the time everyone else was thinking, we can flex the floor, suck the car down, be tons and tons of beautiful downforce. Newey said, no, you don't do that because you'll end up with porpoising. So these are the sort of pointers that I think Adrian can bring in. So it's not going to be about him coming in and unleashing a design for genius front wing. He'll come in and tell him, this is the platform you need. This is where your lap time comes from. Get on with it.
Well, a team that definitely hasn't needed Adrian Newey's input to be competitive in this generation of rules is McLaren. But the driver dynamic is quite interesting there because you've got quite a close fight there between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. But it was a bit unbalanced last season. What does McLaren do if both of its drivers are in title contention and McLaren is in title contention from the very start of the season?
I think that will be one of the most fascinating ways that plays out. Because obviously last year, they probably accepted they didn't do as good a job as possible in managing those two. I think it was kind of a lateness to understanding the championship fight they were in, and a kind of a difficulty. And I mean, Andrea Stella's talks often about this, is that there is a scenario with managing teams and team orders that what Lando Norris needs and Oscar Piastri needs will not always match up with what McLaren needs. So there are decisions to be made in races where the three factors are not chasing the same thing. So they can individually be wanting different outcomes, and that's always a difficult thing to manage. I think from McLaren's perspective, all they can do is give them equal treatment, give them equal standing, give them equal opportunities, and hope that the pair of them get on and do. I think if they try to manipulate things and try to get too complicated and come up with a very lengthy 5-page papaya rules kind of briefing document that outlines stuff, you would just end up tripping yourself over. But I think Monza last year was the classic thing that will prompt them to think things through differently. I think even Andrea Stella now recognises that come out of the Monza chicane in 1-2, you should win that race. You should not end up in a scenario where you come out the second chicane first and third and you're basically left on the back foot. So they've understood their lessons. I think they'll be a bit more ruthless and determined in what they do, but I think equally not as kind of reluctant to get involved. They'll have a plan and a strategy and they'll stick to it.
I think also probably they will need Piastri to take a step to even create that scenario, because after around Monza Baku time last year, I was thinking, well, if McLaren's in the title fight, the driver's title fight from the start, Piastri's looking the more likely. He's the one who looks like he's got the killer instinct in battle. But then, Verstappen won the championship. The pressure came off Norris and he took a step, it seemed. And Piastri looked like he was maybe half a step behind Norris to the end of the year. But of course, if Piastri can take that step, then it becomes tense again. And I wonder, he seemed like he swallowed the papaya rules thing, but wasn't particularly happy about it. And I feel like potentially if they start tripping over each other, he could be looking elsewhere for other drives. Maybe Norris does too. So how does McLaren handle that situation?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there were phases last year where you think, if Piastri had been the one in the second half of the season with the going up against Max, he would be a more you'd think he would have been a more consistent challenger through to the end of the year, and actually wouldn't be making the kind of small little errors and poor starts and that sort of thing. But actually, Piastri didn't have that confidence. It was Lando that ultimately made the step, and especially when the championship pressure was gone off. So I think Lando, he's won the final race, which always is a great feeling to have over the winter going into the new season. He's been through a championship fight now. He knows the pressures and the intensity. I think that will put him in good stead. And I think equally the team knows better how to handle Piastri as well. So when you say to them at Monza, come out the first chicane, and if you're going to make a move, make sure it's easily on and fair, and you don't get involved in trouble. Lando clearly thought that I'll take things a bit cautiously here. Piastri thought, well, this fully complies with the rules. This is clear and fair and easy. I'm going through. So I think just the handling will be more robust this year. And I think in a way, perhaps both drivers will be happier. The difference will be, as inevitably happens, if one driver starts getting the rub of the green, if there are incidents and, tyre changes that don't go their way, does paranoia slip into things? Because very quickly a good, healthy dynamic between drivers can deteriorate quite a lot if you feel that one of the other guys is getting a bit of a up.
Well, someone who probably won't be in title contention unless there's a stunning turnaround from Williams over the winter is Carlos Sainz. So how will he handle adjusting to life in F1's midfield again?
I think he'll be all right because he's had time to adjust to it. I think if he'd gone into the season with a team thinking we can be battling for podiums and wins, and then you turn up in Melbourne and you're 12th, I think that's a much harder scenario to deal with. But I think he knows, and I think he'd addressed it through last season, which is why wins like Mexico were so important, because he knew this is the last time for a while I'm going to be fighting, having a win, fighting for podiums, doing this well. So I think he accepts that reality. So I think it won't be too much of a shock. But I think he will want to see progress. I don't think he'll want to be struggling right at the back. I think he'll want to see, Williams getting into Q3, fighting for points and potentially moving forwards, even if the team knows it's focusing a lot on 26.
Yeah, he's got that kind of determined character about him, hasn't he? That he'll just grin and bear whatever situation he's in and just try to make the best of it. But I'm quite interested in how Sainz being there will affect Alex Albon, because you could argue that Albon's had a bit of an easy ride so far at Williams and not really had much of a test from his teammate apart from a few races with Franco Colapinto in 2024. So how do you think Albon will handle having Sainz as a teammate?
I think it will be an interesting test, because I think that period when Franco came in, because there were kind of two elements to Franco's season. There was the period where he was, F1's demigod, and whatever he did, whatever he did was great, and people loved him, and the results were coming, and no questions at all. And then that second period where the crashes began and the pace wasn't there, and he was struggling, and people thought, well, maybe he's not the real deal after all.
A faster Logan Sargent.
But during that phase where Franco was loved, it was a bit difficult for Alex. And then you saw that, a few little incidents, and then the questions start being asked. So I think Alex will have learned from that, will have understood the pressures, and I think knows that he's going to need to lift his game and be sharper and be a different dynamic compared to, when it's against Logan, when it's effectively pretty much a one-car team, when you're not really being struggled and challenged. So I think he'll relish the challenge, and I think his ambition will not be to beat Carlos. His ambition will be see the bigger picture, just as Carlos will see, that moving that team forward and getting themselves in a position to be competitive in 26.
Yeah, it's a great driver lineup for Williams to have, no question. A bit of chat about Colapinto is quite apt really for our next question, which is, will Alpine sack its new driver in season?
If he doesn't perform. But I think this is generally the way of Formula One, and I think there's no more ruthless a person in Formula One to have as a boss than Flavio Briatore. So I think the second you fall out of favour, the second you're not doing what you're expected, Flavio will not waste a millisecond to take action and do something. Franco's got a lot of sponsorship money behind him. He's got a lot of hype, a lot of interest around him. So Jack knows he's got to perform, but I think that pressure would have been on him anyway. It's just a bit more kind of sharpened and focused now. And I think ultimately the decisions, we can't decide today if they will or won't. The decision will be, is he performing? And he's going to have to be matching Gasly, because as Behrman showed, as Colapinto showed, when the rookies come in now, you perform straight away. you don't. There's not like a customization period of 5, 6, 7 races to do it. You come in and you perform, or you're out.
I guess also it depends on whether Doohan looks at Colapinto's arrival and thinks, oh, it's just another part of the reserve pool that they're expanding. I don't need to worry about it. Or whether he thinks, oh, they've signed this guy to take my seat away from me. And can I handle that in the background when I, come to Melbourne to do my second F1 start, etc. I kind of feel like if you're Alpine, you don't sign Colapinto without being minded to put him in the car as soon as you can, especially if he generates all that buzz again and can bring loads of South American money into a team that has been going through a massive rationalisation, downsizing and shedding staff.
Yeah, I mean, Colapinto will be taking that job because he wants to be racing that car this year. I think there's no doubt about that. It's a different scenario to Paul Aaron and Hirakawa, for example, that they have deals there but not really intended to race. Colapinto wants to be in that car as soon as possible. I think the mistake Doohan will make will be obsessing too much about what Franco is doing and the potential for him. He needs to focus entirely on himself, deliver the performances himself, get the results, and leave all that mess to someone else to worry about.
Can Audi turn its new F1 team around in time for 2026?
No, because I think they're coming from a long way back. I spoke to Mattia Binotto, obviously came in August quite late, and said to him, what was the state of the team when you came in? And he says, pretty much a disaster, really, that they'd given up almost everything, too much focus on the future, hadn't given enough on the present. It was a team frozen. There were no plans, no developments, no strategy. They've got a lot to do. I think infrastructure-wise, they're fine. They just need more staff to be doing stuff. They need to be churning around things quicker and making progress with the car. But I think we've seen the first glimmers of that. The floor that arrived towards the end of the season gave them a step. They obviously got some points in Qatar. So I think that there will be some steps. I don't think it's going to be sensational, but I think there is at least a sign of a turnaround now. But it's not going to be. They aren't going to be battling regularly for podiums at all in 25, and probably unlikely in 26 either.
What if Red Bull's empire continues to crumble?
That's an interesting one, because I see this as an absolute critical season for Red Bull. Max Verstappen won the championship last year, but not because he had the fastest car over the course of the year, but because he had the fastest car up until Miami, and was so dominant. He had such a points buffer, it was there. They obviously lost Newey's influence primarily from Miami. Whether or not, well, we'll never know how much of an impact that had on their kind of the wobbles over the season. Get to the bottom.
It's a startling coincidence.
But would they have found it any quicker with Newey there? Because the problems have been there since 23 when Newey was involved in the car. So, in a parallel universe, maybe we have the answer. But I think if they don't make a step forward, we know from what Max Verstappen said in Hungary, that the weekends when it doesn't go right, he'll throw his toys out the pram and get very angsty about things. So if it's a poor season and the alarm bells are ringing about his 26 engine, does Max think, oh, actually, maybe this place isn't for me at all? Plus, they've got the challenge of 26 with their own engine coming up. So if they have some wobbles, if Max is looking at elsewhere, if the challenge for 26 is quite big and the car's not fantastic, it's quite hard to see how they plot a turnaround in the very short period of time, which I think the start of the year is going to be absolutely fascinating for kind of laying down the dynamic of both Max Verstappen's Formula 1 future and kind of Red Bull's prognosis, probably over the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does feel to me a bit like kind of Red Bull's peaked. And Christian Horner keeps talking about the strength in depth they've got, where they've had such a brain drain. You mentioned 2026. That's a big project to be taking on, while having to obviously focus on 2025, because they're going to want to keep Max happy, right? And he's going to want to go for another championship in 2025, try and make the most of the best of Red Bull as they can be at the moment.
Yeah, I think brain drain's probably a bit of an exaggeration, just because, I know Newey was a massive influence, but at some point he was going to go. And Pierre Vache is a very competent technical director. They've got other great technical people there who have the capability to produce a good car.
But you've got Wheatley as well, and you've got Will Courtney. There's been various things. Rob Marshall, obviously, beforehand.
His responsibilities have been shifted, and they've got plenty of competent people there. And we see rotation elsewhere on the grid. Ferrari have lost Enrico Cardier, so they've got some fluctuation on the technical front. Mercedes in the past have kind of lost technical directors, and they've come around. So I think the changes are part of F1's standard evolution. The key thing is Red Bull building on the momentum it had at the end of last season. What it can't afford is another step down. It's had its wobbles. It's lost its place as the dominant ground effect era team, because you can argue that now is either McLaren or Ferrari, pending probably the rotation of upgrades, because I think that dictated a lot of the season. And it's how Red Bull plot themselves way back now at a time when there can't be a car revolution because there isn't time to do it before 26.
Well, you can also imagine, if Red Bull doesn't start the season strongly and Verstappen starts to get irate with his situation, the questions about what he does next, whether he stays there for 2026 will resume. And you imagine those talks that he and Toto Wolff paused in the summer break of 2024 will probably kick off again. And will that mean that Mercedes has to drop one of its drivers at the end of 2025?
Interesting one, because I think if Max is available, and as Toto Wolff said many times last year, any team boss would do handstands to get hold of a driver of Max Verstappen's calibre. So I cannot imagine a scenario where Max Verstappen walks into Toto's office at the Mercedes motorhome in the paddock and says, "I'll give you a deal." And Toto goes, "Oh no, actually we're not massively interested." So I think if Max was available, Toto would take him. The question then is what happens, and I think that first depends on Andrea Kimi Antonelli. If he is the sensation that Mercedes are convinced he is, and is shining and starring and brilliant, then there will be no reason to drop him. So you've then got the perfect combination of successful veteran, brilliant superstar Max Verstappen and the next generation in Antonelli. But if Antonelli's having the wobbles and having some incidents and crashes and it's not clicking, because there's no guarantee that it does all click next year, then do Mercedes think actually, in the short term and as we head to 26 and new regulations, is a lineup of Verstappen and Russell actually the best thing to take us forward for the Constructors' Championship? So I think a lot of that will depend on how Antonelli performs in the first half of the year if Max becomes available. I think judging it now is impossible, but based on how the season pans out, a bit like doing, the results on track will dictate kind of what Mercedes' mind frame is going forwards. Even though the team, Toto keeps saying that, George and Kimi are our long-term future, will be part of the family forever. It doesn't work like that in Formula One.
But is a Verstappen-Russell lineup even viable after their set two between Qatar and Abu Dhabi?
Oh yeah, of course it is. I think these things are like soap opera type scenarios where these big things play out, and you can have teammates don't have to love each other. Look at Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton operated in the same team fighting for the World Championship. When it comes down to it, teams want the two best drivers they can get their hands on, and Russell's a great driver. We want to see how he develops and can he deliver, make kind of that step to challenge for a World Championship. We know Max can do it. We know Max is brilliant. And if Mercedes feels that these are the two best drivers to put in their cars, then all that other stuff can get sorted quite easily.